a land rich in gold, yet trapped in poverty. A nation ranked the 13th largest producer of gold, yet condemned as the 8th poorest country in the world. This paradox is not a natural curse. It is a legacy of exploitation. For more than a century, Burkina Faso, once called Upper Volta, has been stripped of its wealth, its people bent to the will of distant powers. And yet, from this soil of injustice has risen a young captain who dares to confront the West directly. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, only 34 years old, but already a figure who makes global powers uneasy. He has declared openly, either we accept to fight or we remain slaves forever. These are not the words of compromise. They are the words of defiance. Stay with us. This is not just another headline. It is a turning point in African history. Subscribe now and keep watching as we unfold the story. What makes one small, landlocked nation such a threat to the most powerful states in the world? And why has this man survived no fewer than 18 assassination attempts? The answers lie in the long shadow of colonialism and the new struggle for sovereignty. To understand why Ibrahim Traoré has become the West's greatest nightmare, we must begin with the soil on which his country stands. Burkina Faso, once known as Upper Volta, was not always a sovereign state. In the 19th century, France captured this land, folding it into the framework of French West Africa. For Paris, this was never about people. It was about resources. Gold, cotton, uranium, manganese, copper. The land was a treasure chest. The people were reduced to forced labor, taxation, and silence. Infrastructure was deliberately stunted. Industries left unborn. Education neglected. The aim was clear: keep the nation weak, dependent, and incapable of defiance. By 1960, the winds of decolonization swept across Africa. Under international pressure, France granted Burkina Faso formal independence. Yet this independence was written in sand. What emerged was not sovereignty, but a new kind of chain: neo-colonialism. French troops were allowed to remain under defense agreements. The currency system tied Burkina Faso to the CFA franc, meaning Paris still controlled reserves and monetary policy. Resource contracts were secured by French companies, ensuring that gold and uranium flowed abroad, while little was reinvested at home. In the first years after independence, President Maurice Yameogo governed not as a leader of the people, but as a manager of French interests. Corruption flourished. Dissent was crushed. In 1966, protests and strikes erupted, and the military, under Colonel Sangoulé Lamizana, seized power. Hopes for change quickly evaporated when Lamizana dissolved parliament, suspended the constitution, and consolidated military rule. France did not object. As long as the flow of resources continued, the pattern repeated. In 1980, Colonel Saïd Zerbo staged another coup, only to be replaced in 1982 by Jean-Baptiste Ouédraogo. Each leader claimed to bring stability, but each failed to sever the hidden strings of dependency. Military coups became almost routine, leaving the country in political turbulence and economic fragility. But in 1983, the cycle was broken, at least for a moment. A fiery young officer, Thomas Sankara, rose to power. His vision was unlike anything Burkina Faso had seen. He rejected the colonial identity of Upper Volta and renamed the nation Burkina Faso, Land of Upright People. It was more than a name. It was a declaration of dignity. Sankara wrote the new national anthem himself, calling on citizens to stand with pride. Sankara accused the West of looting Africa through neo-colonial structures. He launched mass literacy campaigns, vaccination drives, and bold reforms for women's rights, outlawing forced marriages and female genital mutilation, elevating women into government roles. He cracked down on corruption, banning luxury perks for ministers, forcing them to drive simple Renault 5 cars instead of Mercedes. He dressed as a soldier, rode a bicycle to work, and lived as one of the people. Agriculture was his battlefield of transformation. He demanded food self-sufficiency, giving farmers control of their land, introducing modern tools, and boosting production by 75% within just 3 years. For the first time, Burkina Faso could feed itself. He rejected IMF and World Bank loans, calling foreign aid a trap that enslaved poor nations. But this radical independence came at a cost. France and other Western powers saw Sankara not as a visionary, but as a threat. By 1987, after only 4 years in power, he was assassinated in a coup led by Blaise Compaoré, with Western support alleged but never proven in court. With Sankara's death, his reforms were reversed, and Burkina Faso was dragged back into the orbit of dependency. The vision of an upright people was buried, but not forgotten. It lingered like a seed beneath the soil, waiting for another season. The question was never whether the people desired sovereignty, but whether another leader would dare to fight for it. Who would pick up Sankara's fallen banner? The gunshots of 15 October 1987 silenced Thomas Sankara, but they did not silence the truth he spoke. His friend-turned-rival, Blaise Compaoré, stepped into power, undoing the reforms and reopening the door to Western influence. For 27 long years, Compaoré ruled Burkina Faso as a strong man, not for the dignity of his people, but for the comfort of elites and the satisfaction of foreign partners. The IMF and World Bank returned. Loans flowed, but the cost was sovereignty. Corruption deepened, inequality widened, and the dream of independence faded into shadow. By 2014, the people's patience ran out. When Compaoré attempted to amend the constitution to extend his rule, anger spilled into the streets. Protesters stormed the parliament, set government buildings aflame, and forced him to flee into exile in Côte d'Ivoire. It was a moment of liberation, yet not of stability. A darker storm was already gathering. The collapse of Muammar Gaddafi's regime in Libya in 2011 unleashed a flood of fighters across the Sahel. By 2015, jihadist groups linked to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State were seizing villages in northern and eastern Burkina Faso. Smuggling routes became lifelines for militants. Violence spread like wildfire. Between 2015 and 2021, more than 10,000 lives were lost, and nearly 2 million people were displaced from their homes. Every week brought news of massacres. Schools closed under fear, and children grew up in the shadow of terror. On paper, Burkina Faso was not alone. French and American troops were stationed in the country, claiming to fight terrorism. But on the ground, the reality was different. Villagers saw foreign forces entrenched in bases, while jihadists tightened their grip on vast territories. By 2021, nearly 40% of Burkina Faso's land was effectively outside government control. It was a bitter paradox. Foreign soldiers occupied the soil, yet ordinary Burkinabé remained unprotected. At the front lines, young officers faced impossible odds. They fought with outdated weapons, under-resourced and under-supported, while senior leaders dined in luxury and held cocktails with foreign advisors. Each battle demanded the lives of ordinary soldiers, while the political class clung to comfort and denial. Resentment grew like fire in dry grass. In whispers across barracks, a question began to circulate. If the leadership will not fight to save the nation, should we? This question turned into resolve in late September 2022. On 30th September, A 34-year-old captain appeared on state television. His name was Ibrahim Traoré. With calm determination, he announced that the era of complacency was over. He declared that Burkina Faso would no longer bow its head, that the unfinished legacy of Thomas Sankara would be revived. The symbolism was striking. Traoré refused to promote himself beyond captain. He declined the presidential salary. He called himself not a ruler, but a soldier of the people. His mission was clear: fight terrorism, restore sovereignty, and end the cycle of corruption. For the masses, weary from violence and betrayal, his words lit a spark of hope. Crowds hailed him as the voice they had been waiting for. Young, uncompromised, fearless. But for the entrenched powers, both within the country and abroad, his rise was a thunderclap. What would this young captain do next? And how far would he go in his defiance of the world's most powerful nations? When Ibrahim Traoré assumed power on 30th of September 2022, the air was thick with uncertainty. Was this yet another coup in a long chain of military takeovers? Or was it a break with history? For many citizens of Burkina Faso, the answer became clear in the months that followed. Traoré did not behave like the leaders before him. He refused the trappings of power. His rank remained captain, a gesture of humility. His presidential salary went unclaimed. He called himself a soldier of the people, not a president above them. These decisions were not mere symbolism. They were signals of a different kind of leadership, one that aimed to restore dignity rather than consolidate privilege. But symbolism alone could not stem the tide of crisis. The nation was still under siege from jihadists. Almost 40% of its territory remained under militant control. Traoré's first move was to strengthen defense from within. He launched a bold initiative to recruit 500 civilian volunteers who would train alongside the army. These volunteers for the defense of the homeland were ordinary citizens, farmers, traders, laborers, who decided to stand with their soldiers. It was a direct appeal to collective responsibility. The fight for sovereignty would not be outsourced. It would be owned by the people themselves. In parallel, Traoré tackled corruption head-on. Ministers and senior officials saw their perks stripped away. Lavish cars, first-class flights, and extravagant allowances were cut. The message was unambiguous. Leadership meant service, not luxury. Economics, however, was the heart of the struggle. For decades, Burkina Faso had been the 13th largest producer of gold in the world, yet it remained among the poorest nations. The wealth of the soil left the country unprocessed, exported cheaply, while profits accumulated abroad. Traoré sought to break this cycle. In 2023, he approved the construction of the nation's first state-run gold refinery. For the first time, raw gold would not simply be shipped overseas. It would be processed locally, adding value and creating jobs. In 2024, he took an even more dramatic step, suspending foreign gold export permits. This was not just an economic decision. It was a declaration of independence. No longer would the nation's veins of gold be siphoned off without accountability. These reforms shocked the West. Contracts that had once been treated as untouchable were suddenly under review. Revenues that once flowed abroad were being redirected towards the Burkinabe state. Critics warned of retaliation, of economic isolation, of destabilization. Supporters hailed it as the first genuine step towards sovereignty. And yet, the risks were immense. Rumors of assassination plots began to circulate. Reports emerged that Traoré's personal guards were offered bribes as high as 5 million euros to betray him. But rather than succumb, they exposed the attempts, reinforcing his image as a leader besieged yet unbowed. Among ordinary citizens, the effect was profound. Traoré's stance reignited the memory of Thomas Sankara. For a generation that had grown up under corruption and terror, here was a figure who seemed to embody courage and sacrifice. He was young, uncorrupted, and unafraid to confront powers both internal and external. His defiance gave the people something more valuable than gold. It gave them hope. The Ibrahim Traoré coup was not merely another military takeover. It was framed as a revolution of dignity, one that sought to end dependency and restore true sovereignty. Still, questions lingered. Could a small, landlocked nation withstand the weight of international pressure? Would the reform survive? Or would Burkina Faso face the same fate as Sankara's revolution 3 decades earlier? The eyes of the world turned to Ouagadougou, not to see whether Traoré could fight jihadists, but to ask a larger question. How would global powers respond to his defiance? If the domestic reforms of Ibrahim Traoré rattled elites inside Burkina Faso, his foreign policy shook capitals far beyond its borders. For the first time in decades, a Sahelian leader was not pleading for aid, but demanding sovereignty. One of his earliest moves was symbolic yet seismic: the expulsion of French forces. For years, Paris had maintained troops in Burkina Faso under the banner of counterterrorism. Yet ordinary citizens saw little change in security. To them, foreign troops had become symbols of occupation rather than protection. Traoré made a decisive call. The bases would be closed. The soldiers would leave. Alongside them, the French ambassador was ordered out, and French-backed media outlets were banned from operating. It was a clean break, something unthinkable under his predecessors. In the vacuum left behind, new partnerships emerged. In early 2023, Burkina Faso reopened a Russian embassy for the first time in 31 years. Moscow supplied advanced weaponry and pledged support against Western interference. Traoré's rhetoric was clear: either motherland or death. It echoed Sankara's uncompromising defiance, but now carried into a multipolar world where Russia was eager to counterbalance American and French influence in Africa. China, too, became a partner of interest. Talks on infrastructure and mining deals signaled a pivot towards the east. For Beijing, Burkina Faso represented both opportunity and strategy. Access to resources and a foothold in a region once monopolized by France. For Ouagadougou, it offered an escape from one-sided dependency. But perhaps the boldest step was regional. Alongside Mali and Niger, Traoré helped establish the Alliance of Sahel States, a bloc committed to mutual defense, resource sovereignty, and shared dignity. 3 nations scarred by coups, yet united in their rejection of external dominance. For the African Union and ECOWAS, this alliance presented a dilemma. Was it a destabilizing union, or a genuine expression of sovereignty? For the European Union and the United States, it was a direct challenge to the framework of influence they had relied upon for decades. Commentators began to speak of a Burkina Faso revolution, not simply within national borders, but across the entire Sahel. A rejection of neo-colonialism, a demand for partnership instead of pity. In Washington and Paris, concern grew. If one small, landlocked nation could defy, what stopped others from following? Could the Sahel become a domino line of sovereignty movements, slipping from Western grasp? The question now was not whether Burkina Faso would resist, but whether the global order itself could tolerate such defiance. Would the alliance endure? Or would pressure from the world's most powerful nations crush it before it grew? The rise of Ibrahim Traoré has set Burkina Faso on a new course. But the path ahead is strewn with both peril and promise. On one side lies danger. 18 reported assassination attempts remind the world that powerful interests will not sit idle as contracts collapse and gold slips from their grasp. The machinery of destabilization, covert funding, propaganda, diplomatic isolation can be unleashed against leaders who refuse to bow. Traoré's youth and defiance make him a target, just as Thomas Sankara was before him. History whispers a warning. Revolutions are fragile when they threaten entrenched empires. Yet on the other side lies opportunity. By asserting control over gold refining and suspending foreign export permits, Burkina Faso has taken its first steps toward retaining wealth at home. If managed wisely, these moves could generate jobs, strengthen public services, and lift millions from poverty. The refinery is more than an industrial facility. It is a symbol of sovereignty, of value finally added on Burkinabe soil, rather than siphoned away. Security remains a heavy burden. Jihadist violence has not vanished, and victory will demand not just weapons, but unity and resilience. Traoré's call for civilian volunteers is a bold experiment, one that could empower communities or fracture them if not carefully guided. The long-term test will be whether Burkina Faso can build a professional, well-resourced army that defends its people without replicating cycles of militarized politics. Regionally, the alliance of Sahel states holds promise. By standing with Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso gains strength in numbers. A united Sahel could resist external pressures more effectively than isolated nations ever could. But solidarity must be matched by governance. If the alliance drifts into authoritarianism without delivering tangible benefits for ordinary people, its credibility will erode. Internationally, the pivot towards Russia, China, and India creates new avenues of trade and defense. Yet it also deepens geopolitical fault lines. The West will not simply retreat from Africa. It will counter with sanctions, soft power, and influence campaigns. The struggle for sovereignty may transform into a larger contest between global powers, with Burkina Faso caught in the middle. Still, there is a deeper current at work. Across Africa, youth see Traoré as a symbol, a leader who refuses to bend, who calls for dignity over dependency. In Nigeria, Ghana, and beyond, his name is invoked as proof that resistance is possible. For many, he embodies the spirit of Thomas Sankara, revived in a new generation. The future remains uncertain. Is Burkina Faso carving the road to true independence? Or is it marching into the storm of global retaliation? The answer will shape not only one nation, but the destiny of an entire region. From the ashes of colonial exploitation to the roar of defiance, the story of Burkina Faso is one of endurance. It is the story of a people who were told to accept dependency, yet refused. It is the story of Thomas Sankara, who renamed a nation the land of upright people, only to be struck down before his dream matured. And now it is the story of Ibrahim Traoré, a young captain who has dared to pick up that fallen banner. The challenges are immense. Terrorism still scars the land. Poverty still grips communities. And foreign powers still circle, unwilling to release their hold. Assassination plots remind us that the stakes are not abstract. They are measured in lives and futures. Yet for the first time in decades, many Burkinabe feel that the tide may be turning. The refinery, the suspension of gold exports, the expulsion of foreign troops. These are not just policies. They are signals that the soil of Burkina Faso will no longer be tilled for others alone. The struggle is not only for one nation. Across Africa, young people look to Ouagadougou and see a possibility that sovereignty is not a relic of the past, but a cause worth fighting for today. If Burkina Faso, small and landlocked, can rise, what excuse remains for larger and richer states to remain bound by dependency? This is why the stakes are global. If Ibrahim Traoré succeeds, he will not only free his people from a cycle of exploitation, he will prove that an African future built on dignity and independence is possible. If he fails, the weight of disappointment could crush a generation's hope. In the eyes of many, the Ibrahim Traoré coup is more than a seizure of power. It is a challenge to a centuries-old order. Whether the West admits it or not, the Burkina Faso Revolution has begun, and at its heart stands a captain who survived 18 assassination attempts, still refusing to bow. The question is simple, yet thunderous. Will history remember this as another failed uprising, or as the dawn of Africa's true independence? If you believe this struggle matters, do not remain silent. Subscribe, share, and let this story echo far beyond borders, because the world must know that the fight for dignity is not over.